Jonathan Carter paced the length of his grand, minimalist living room, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The sunlight streaming through the oversized windows seemed out of place in a home that felt more like a museum than a sanctuary. Outside, the sprawling garden lay untouched, its beauty wasted on a household where silence reigned supreme. He checked his watch. The new nanny candidate was due any minute. Jonathan had reviewed dozens of applications and conducted multiple interviews over the past few months, but none of the candidates had lasted more than a week. They either found Liam's condition too challenging or couldn't meet Jonathan's exacting standards. Mr. Carter, his assistant Clara, called from the hallway. Miss Brooks is here. Jonathan straightened his tie, his face settling into its usual stoic expression. Send her in. A moment later, Emma Brooks walked in. She was younger than he expected, mid-30s perhaps, with an air of calm confidence. Her dark brown hair was tied back in a practical bun, and her warm hazel eyes scanned the room before landing on Jonathan. Good morning, Mr. Carter, she said, extending her hand. Miss Brooks, Jonathan replied, shaking her hand briefly. Take a seat. Emma sat, her posture straight but not stiff. Jonathan settled across from her, his sharp blue eyes assessing her every movement. You've reviewed Liam's file? He asked, cutting straight to the point. Yes, Emma replied. I understand he has a rare respiratory condition that requires constant monitoring. I also saw the list of medications and emergency protocols. I'm confident I can handle it. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. You seem very sure of yourself. Many before you have said the same thing, and yet they've all left within days. Emma met his gaze evenly. With respect, Mr. Carter, I'm not them. I've worked with children who have complex needs before. I understand that this job requires more than just following instructions. It requires patience and adaptability. Adaptability, Jonathan repeated, leaning back in his chair. That's an interesting word. Tell me, how would you handle a situation where Liam refuses his treatments? Emma's lips curved into a slight smile. Children often resist what they don't understand. I'd explain the treatment to him in a way that makes sense for his age. If that doesn't work, I'd try incorporating it into a game or activity he enjoys. And if that fails, then I'd ask for your guidance, Emma replied without hesitation. You know your son better than anyone. Jonathan's expression softened for a fraction of a second before his mask of indifference returned. Fair enough. Why do you want this job, Miss Brooks? It's not exactly easy or glamorous. Emma hesitated, her eyes flickering with an emotion Jonathan couldn't quite place. Because I know what it's like to feel isolated, she said quietly. Liam deserves someone who sees him for more than his condition. Someone who believes in him. Jonathan leaned forward, his curiosity piqued despite himself. And what makes you believe you're that person? Emma didn't flinch. Because I care. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Jonathan studied her carefully, his mind racing. She was different from the others. There was a quiet strength about her, an authenticity that couldn't be faked. He stood abruptly, signaling the end of the interview. You'll start tomorrow. Clara will show you to the quarters we've prepared for you. Emma rose, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I won't let you down. As she turned to leave, Jonathan called after her. One more thing. Emma paused, glancing over her shoulder. There are cameras in every room except Liam's. I'll be watching. Emma nodded, her expression unreadable. I wouldn't expect anything less. As the door closed behind her, Jonathan sat back down, his mind conflicted. For the first time in years, he felt something other than doubt, something dangerously close to hope. Emma woke up early on her first day, the soft morning light streaming through her modest yet comfortable quarters in the Carter mansion. After a quick breakfast, she reviewed Liam's medical chart one more time before heading to his room. She knocked gently and opened the door to find the boy sitting in bed, propped up by pillows, his small frame looking even more fragile in the oversized room. His blonde hair was messy, and his wide, wary eyes darted toward her. Good morning, Liam, Emma said, her voice warm but calm. He didn't reply, his gaze dropping to the stuffed dinosaur clutched in his hands. I'm Emma, she continued, stepping closer. I'll be helping take care of you from now on. You're the new nanny, Liam mumbled without looking up. That's right, she replied, pulling a chair beside his bed. I hear you like dinosaurs. Is that a T-Rex? Liam's fingers tightened around the toy, and for a moment, Emma thought he wouldn't answer. Then, almost reluctantly, he whispered, "It's a velociraptor." Emma smiled. "Ah, the clever ones. Did you know they could run as fast as a cheetah?" Liam's eyes flickered with interest, but he quickly masked it. "Are you going to make me do boring breathing stuff like the others?" "Breathing exercises aren't boring if you pretend you're a velociraptor hunting in the jungle," Emma said, leaning in conspiratorially. Liam glanced at her, skepticism mixed with curiosity. "How?" "Well," Emma began, "you can't make noise when you're hunting, right? That means you have to control your breathing, slow and steady, like this." She demonstrated, inhaling deeply through her nose and exhaling softly through her mouth. "Think you can try?" Liam hesitated before mimicking her. His breaths were uneven at first, but Emma didn't correct him. Instead, she said, "Not bad. You're already sneaking up on your prey." A faint smile tugged at his lips. Just then, Jonathan appeared in the doorway, his arms crossed. "Is everything under control?" Emma turned to him, unfazed. "Perfectly. We were just talking about velociraptors." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Velociraptors?" "Yes," Emma said. "Liam is practicing how they breathe while hunting." Jonathan's lips twitched as though he wanted to smile but refused to let himself. "Interesting approach. Let's hope it works." Liam shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Emma and his father. "Dad, can you leave? You're making it weird." Jonathan blinked, clearly taken aback. "Weird?" "Yeah," Liam muttered. "You're just standing there." Emma bit back a laugh. "It's okay, Mr. Carter. I've got it from here." Jonathan gave a curt nod and left, but not before glancing back at Emma with something resembling approval. By lunchtime, Emma had managed to coax Liam out of his room and into the kitchen, where Clara had prepared his favorite macaroni and cheese. "You know," Emma said, sitting across from him, "I think velociraptors would love mac and cheese if they tried it." Liam giggled. "Dinosaurs didn't eat cheese." "How do you know? Maybe that's why they're extinct," Emma teased, taking a bite of her own meal. The boy laughed, the sound light and free, and Emma felt a small sense of victory. Later that evening, Jonathan watched the footage from the day's cameras on his tablet. He saw Emma kneeling beside Liam's bed, engaging him with stories about dinosaurs. He saw her laughing with him at lunch. "She's different," he muttered to himself, setting the tablet down. For the first time in years, the house felt alive. The following weeks settled into a routine, one that was both unfamiliar and strangely comforting to Jonathan. Each morning, he would catch glimpses of Emma and Liam in the garden or the library, her laugh soft and infectious, coaxing joy from a boy who had long forgotten how to smile. But something about Emma unnerved him. There was a weight to her gaze, a depth to her understanding of Liam's struggles that Jonathan couldn't ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jonathan walked into his study and found Emma there, her eyes scanning the titles on the bookshelf. She jumped slightly when he cleared his throat. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said quickly, stepping back. "You're not intruding," Jonathan replied, though his tone was clipped. "I wasn't expecting anyone in here, that's all." Emma gestured toward the shelf. "I noticed Liam reading one of these books. I wanted to see if there were others he might like." Jonathan relaxed slightly. His curiosity piqued. Which one caught his attention? She pulled a worn hardcover from the shelf. "This one, The Adventures of a Young Explorer." He seemed fascinated by the idea of exploring uncharted places. Jonathan let out a faint chuckle. That was his mother's favorite book. She read it to him every night before we lost her. Emma hesitated, her expression softening. "I'm sorry, Mr. Plating, Carter. Losing someone you love, it changes everything." He nodded curtly, the familiar knot of grief tightening in his chest. "It does. I think Liam remembers more about her than you realize," Emma said gently. "He doesn't talk about her much, but when he does, there's a light in his eyes. He's holding on to her in his own way." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I've done what I can to protect him from that pain." "Sometimes protecting someone means letting them feel what they need to feel," Emma replied, "even if it hurts." Jonathan turned away, his gaze falling on a framed photograph of Catherine. "It's not that simple." "Maybe not," Emma agreed, "but avoiding it doesn't make it go away." Later that night, as Jonathan reviewed footage from the day, he paused on a scene that caught him off guard. Emma was sitting with Liam by the fireplace, the book open on her lap. Did your mom really love this book? Liam asked, his voice tentative. She did, Emma replied softly. And I think she'd love knowing you're reading it now. Liam's fingers traced the edge of the book. Do you think she'd be proud of me? Emma placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. I know she would. Jonathan closed the tablet. The image of Emma and Liam burned into his mind. For the first time in years, he felt something shift, a crack in the walls he'd built around his heart. The next morning, Jonathan found Emma in the garden, tending to the flowers with Liam. Miss Brooks, he called, his tone softer than usual. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. Good morning, Mr. Carter. I've been thinking about what you said last night, he began, his voice low. About letting Liam feel. Emma straightened, her expression cautious but encouraging. And? You're right, Jonathan admitted, surprising even himself. But I don't know how to start, Emma smiled gently. You already have. Just be there for him, Mr. Carter. That's all he really needs. Jonathan nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time in years, he wondered if healing was truly possible, not just for Liam, but for himself. The day was overcast, the kind of weather that seemed to dull the edges of everything. Emma found Liam sitting on the window seat in his room, staring out at the gray sky. His velociraptor toy lay abandoned beside him. Not hunting today? Emma asked softly as she entered, trying to lift his mood. Liam didn't look at her. It's too quiet outside. The jungle's gone. Emma sat down beside him, careful to give him space. Sometimes the jungle just needs a little time to wake up, and sometimes it's okay to be quiet too. He finally turned to her, his small face troubled. Miss Emma, do you remember your mom? Emma blinked at the unexpected question. I do. Why do you ask? Liam hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his sweater. I don't really remember mine. I try, but it's like I'm forgetting her, and I don't want to. Her heart ached for him. Liam, forgetting little things doesn't mean you don't love her. Memories have a way of sticking around, even when they feel far away. Sometimes they come back when you least expect them. He looked back out the window. Dad doesn't talk about her. Ever. It's like she was never here. Emma reached out, gently placing her hand on his. That doesn't mean he doesn't love her, Liam. Sometimes people don't talk about the ones they love because it hurts too much. He frowned. But it hurts not talking about her, too. Later that evening, Emma found Jonathan in his study, poring over contracts with a furrowed brow. She hesitated at the door, then knocked lightly. Miss Brooks, he said without looking up. Is Liam all right? He's fine, she replied, stepping inside. But there's something we need to talk about. Jonathan looked up, his expression wary. Go on. Emma sat down across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Liam is struggling, Mr. Carter. He feels like he's forgetting Catherine, and it's tearing him up inside. Jonathan's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. I've done everything I can to protect him from that pain. But by protecting him, you're pushing her memory away, Emma said gently. He needs to know it's okay to remember her, to talk about her, and he needs to hear it from you. Jonathan stood abruptly, pacing the room. You don't understand. Every time I think about her, it's like losing her all over again. I can't do that to him. Emma rose, her voice firm but kind. You're already doing it to him by staying silent. Liam wants to know who she was, what she loved, what she was like as a mom. That's not something you can protect him from. It's something he needs to heal. Jonathan stopped, his back to her. His shoulders were tense, his breathing uneven. What if I fail him? What if I say the wrong thing? Emma stepped closer. You won't, because you love him, and that's all he needs to hear. It doesn't have to be perfect, Mr. Carter. It just has to be real. He turned to face her, his expression raw and unguarded for the first time. I don't know if I can. Yes, you can, Emma said softly, and I'll be here to help if you need me. That night, Jonathan found himself standing in the doorway of Liam's room. His son was asleep, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. For a long moment, Jonathan simply watched, his mind replaying Emma's words. Finally, he stepped inside, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Liam's face. I miss her too, he whispered. His voice cracked, but he forced himself to continue. And I promise, I'll tell you everything you want to know. About her, about us, about how much she loved you. In his sleep, Liam stirred, a faint smile curling his lips. Jonathan stayed there until the first light of dawn, his heart heavy, but for the first time, a little lighter too. Emma had spent the afternoon tidying the library while Liam napped. It was her favorite room in the house, filled with endless shelves of books that told stories of adventure, mystery, and love. As she rearranged a stack of novels, her hand brushed against something tucked behind a row of dusty encyclopedias. Curious, she pulled out a folder marked with the faint stamp of a police department. Her breath caught as she flipped it open. The faded pages detailed a car accident, the one that had claimed Catherine Carter's life. The report described the rainy night, the sharp curve, and the tragic end. But what made her heart race were the notes in the margin, comments about an unidentified witness, and the suggestion of foul play. Miss Brooks, a deep voice cut through the quiet, startling her. Emma spun around to find Jonathan standing in the doorway, his expression dark. "What are you doing?" I found this behind the books," she stammered, holding up the folder. "I didn't mean to pry." His eyes narrowed, and he stepped into the room, snatching the folder from her hands. "This is private." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "But why was it hidden here? This isn't just an accident report, is it?" "That's none of your business," Jonathan snapped, his voice sharp. "You're here to take care of Liam, not dig into my past." Emma straightened, refusing to be intimidated. "Liam is your past, Mr. Carter, and your future. Whatever this is, it's affecting you, and by extension, him. He deserves to know the truth." Jonathan clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on the folder. "I won't have you telling me how to raise my son." "I'm not telling you how to raise him," Emma replied, her tone firm. "I'm telling you that your silence is creating shadows in his life, shadows that he's too young to understand." Jonathan's face was a storm of emotions, anger, pain, fear. He turned on his heel, walking toward the door. "You're fired," he said coldly. Emma's heart sank, but she refused to back down. "If that's what you want, fine. But I'm not leaving until you find someone else who can care for Liam. He needs stability, especially now." Jonathan paused, his back to her. "Stay out of my way," he said before disappearing down the hall. That evening, Emma sat by Liam's bedside, watching him sleep. Her mind raced with questions about the report and Jonathan's reaction. She knew she'd crossed a line, but she also knew that something about the accident didn't add up. When Liam stirred, his eyes fluttering open, he smiled sleepily at her. "Miss Emma, will you tell me a story?" "Of course," she said softly, brushing his hair back. "Once upon a time, there was a little boy who loved dinosaurs. One day, he met a magical raptor that helped him find his roar." Liam giggled, his eyes sparkling even in the dim light. "A magical raptor?" "Yes," Emma whispered, her heart warming at his laughter. "And this raptor reminded him that even when the world feels big and scary, he's stronger than he knows." As Liam drifted back to sleep, Emma made a silent vow. Whatever secrets Jonathan was hiding, she would uncover them, for Liam's sake. Jonathan sat in his study, the police report open on his desk. His hands trembled as he read the words he'd tried to forget. The crash, the unanswered questions, the whispers of foul play. He thought of Emma's words, her insistence that silence was hurting Liam. She was right, but the idea of reopening those wounds was unbearable. With a heavy sigh, he reached for his phone. "Clara," he said when she answered, "I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Emma Brooks." If she was going to challenge his carefully constructed world, he needed to know exactly who she was. The tension in the house was palpable. Jonathan avoided Emma at every turn, and though he allowed her to stay temporarily for Liam's sake, the walls between them had grown higher. Emma focused on Liam, pouring her energy into making him feel loved and secure, but the weight of Jonathan's silence loomed over her. One evening, as Emma tucked Liam into bed, he looked up at her with wide, worried eyes. "Miss Emma," he whispered, "are you leaving too?" Her heart clenched. "Why would you think that, sweetheart?" Liam hugged his dinosaur tightly. "Because Dad's mad at you. He gets mad, and then people leave." Emma smoothed his hair back, forcing a reassuring smile. "I'm not going anywhere, Liam. Not until you're ready. I promise." Later that night, Emma found herself in the kitchen, staring into a cup of untouched tea. She heard the heavy sound of footsteps and turned to see Jonathan standing in the doorway, his expression guarded. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. He didn't answer, instead moving to pour himself a glass of water. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Emma set her cup down. Mr. Carter, I understand why you're angry, but I need you to understand why I did what I did. Jonathan leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. I'm listening. She met his gaze, her voice steady. Liam is at a point in his life where he's trying to understand who he is and where he comes from. He's asking questions about Catherine, and he's looking to you for answers. If you don't give him those answers, he'll start to fill in the blanks himself, and that could hurt him even more. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Emma took a deep breath, her tone softening. I found that report by accident, but I couldn't ignore it. Whatever happened to Catherine, it's clear it left scars on you too. Scars that you've been hiding behind. But Liam needs you to face them, for both your sakes. Jonathan's shoulders sagged slightly, the tension in his posture easing just enough to reveal the exhaustion beneath. You think I haven't tried? Every time I think about her, it's like I'm right back there. That night, that rain, that phone call telling me she was gone. Emma stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. You don't have to do it alone. And you don't have to be perfect. Just start small. Tell Liam what she loved, what made her laugh. Give him pieces of her so he doesn't have to imagine her all on his own. Jonathan looked away, his gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. And what if he asks about the accident? About what really happened? Then you tell him the truth, Emma said simply. Because the truth, even when it hurts, is better than silence. The next morning, Jonathan stood in the doorway of Liam's room, watching as his son played quietly with his toy dinosaurs. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure if he could find the right words. Finally, he stepped inside. Liam, can we talk? Liam looked up, his brow furrowing. Am I in trouble? Jonathan shook his head, sitting down on the edge of the bed. No, buddy, I think it's time we talked about your mom. Liam's eyes widened. Really? Jonathan nodded, his throat tightening. Your mom was amazing. She had this laugh that could fill a whole room, and she loved to sing, even though she wasn't very good at it. She loved you so much, Liam, more than anything in the world. Liam clutched his dinosaur, his voice small. What happened to her? Jonathan took a deep breath, his heart pounding. She was in a car accident. It was a rainy night, and sometimes accidents happen that we can't control. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't her fault. I miss her every day, just like you do. Tears welled in Liam's eyes, and Jonathan pulled him into a tight hug. It's okay to miss her, he whispered, and it's okay to talk about her. Whenever you want to, I'll be here. From the doorway, Emma watched the scene unfold, her own eyes brimming with tears. For the first time, she saw a crack in Jonathan's armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the grief. And in that moment, she knew she had done the right thing. The evening was unusually quiet. Emma had just finished preparing Liam's medications for the night when she noticed something wasn't right. Liam was sitting on the couch, his breathing labored, his chest rising and falling unevenly. She rushed to his side, her heart racing. Liam, sweetheart, are you okay? She asked, kneeling beside him. He shook his head, his eyes wide with panic. It's hard to breathe, he whispered. Emma grabbed the emergency inhaler from the nearby table and administered it, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. You're going to be fine, Liam. Just keep your eyes on me and breathe as slowly as you can. The inhaler offered little relief. His condition wasn't improving. Emma didn't waste another second. She called Jonathan. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice urgent. We need to get Liam to the hospital now. The drive to the hospital was tense. Jonathan kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Liam, who was slumped against Emma in the back seat. She whispered calming words to the boy, holding his hand tightly. It'll be okay, Emma assured him. We're almost there. Jonathan's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Why didn't I see this coming? He muttered to himself. It's not your fault, Emma said firmly, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. Focus on getting us there safely. At the hospital, doctors whisked Liam away, leaving Emma and Jonathan in the waiting area. The sterile white walls seemed to close in around them as the minutes stretched into hours. Jonathan paced relentlessly, his face a mask of frustration and guilt. How did this happen? He was fine this morning. Emma sat quietly for a moment before speaking. With his condition, things can change quickly. You've done everything you can to keep him safe, Jonathan, but sometimes These things are beyond our control. He stopped pacing, turning to her with a mixture of anger and vulnerability. What if it's not enough? What if I lose him too? Emma stood, stepping closer. You won't lose him. Liam's stronger than you think, and he's not alone in this. You're not alone in this. Jonathan looked at her, his defenses lowering for a moment. Why do you care so much? Because Liam isn't just your son, Jonathan, she said softly. He's an incredible little boy who deserves every ounce of love and care we can give him. And you deserve to believe you're doing a good job. Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, but a nurse entered the room before he could. Mr. Carter? Yes, Jonathan said, stepping forward. The doctor stabilized Liam, the nurse said with a reassuring smile. He had a severe asthma attack, but he's responding well to treatment. You can see him now. Relief washed over Jonathan's face, and he nodded. Thank you. In the hospital room, Liam lay in bed, his breathing easier but his face pale. Emma sat beside him, gently stroking his hair. Hey, buddy, Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion as he sat on the other side. You scared us. Liam gave a small, tired smile. Sorry, Dad. You don't have to apologize, Jonathan said, taking his son's hand. I'm just glad you're okay. Emma leaned closer, her tone light. You know, Liam, you've got everyone running around like crazy. You must be pretty special. Liam chuckled weakly. Does this mean I get extra dessert when we go home? Jonathan laughed for the first time in hours, the sound easing some of the tension in the room. We'll see about that. Later that night, Emma stayed by Liam's bedside while Jonathan stepped outside to make a few calls. When he returned, he found her slumped in a chair, her head resting against the wall, her eyes closed. He stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of her exhaustion. She had been a constant presence, her strength unwavering, even when his faltered. Emma, he said softly. Her eyes fluttered open, and she sat up straight. Is everything all right? You should go home and rest, he said. She shook her head. I'm not leaving him. Jonathan sighed, pulling up a chair beside her. You're stubborn, you know that? Emma smiled faintly. I've been called worse. For a moment, they sat in silence, the hum of the hospital machines filling the space between them. Thank you, Jonathan said finally. Emma looked at him, surprised. For what? For being here. For caring about Liam. For challenging me when I need it, he admitted. Emma's expression softened. You're a good father, Jonathan. Liam knows it, and so do I. You just need to believe it yourself. Jonathan glanced at Liam, who was sleeping peacefully. I'm trying, he said quietly. That's all anyone can ask, Emma replied, her voice gentle. As the night stretched on, they sat together, united in their love for the boy who had become their shared world. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Liam's hospital room. He was still asleep, his chest rising and falling steadily, a comforting rhythm after the chaos of the previous day. Jonathan sat in a chair by the bed, his head resting in his hands, while Emma quietly adjusted the blanket around Liam. Did you get any sleep? She asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. Jonathan looked up, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. A little, not enough. Emma pulled up a chair beside him. You don't have to do this alone, you know? He let out a dry laugh. That's what everyone says. But when it comes down to it, it's always me who has to make the decisions, carry the weight. You're not wrong, Emma said, meeting his gaze. But sometimes, carrying the weight doesn't mean you have to do it without help. Jonathan sighed, leaning back in his chair. You make it sound easy. It's not, she admitted, but you've already taken the hardest step, letting someone in. Jonathan's lips twitched in a faint smile. Is that what I've done? Emma nodded, her expression unwavering. You've let me into Liam's life, and whether you realize it or not, you've let me into yours too. Later that afternoon, Liam stirred awake, his eyes fluttering open to find both Emma and Jonathan sitting nearby. Dad? Miss Emma? His voice was soft, but his smile was bright. Jonathan immediately moved closer. Hey, buddy, how are you feeling? Better, Liam replied. Can we go home now? Soon, Jonathan said, brushing the hair from his son's forehead. The doctors want to keep you for one more day, just to be sure. Liam pouted, but nodded. Okay, can we read the Explorer book while we wait? Emma smiled. I think we can manage that. As the day wore on, the three of them shared quiet moments that felt like the calm after a storm. Jonathan read aloud from Liam's favorite book, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Emma chimed in, making funny voices for the characters, earning giggles from Liam and even a chuckle from Jonathan. Dad, you're not bad at this, Liam said, grinning. Jonathan smirked. Not bad? I'll have you know I'm excellent at this. Emma laughed. I'd give him a solid 8 out of 10. 8? Jonathan feigned offense. I deserve at least a 9. Liam giggled. Maybe if you do the pirate voice better. Jonathan's attempt at a pirate accent was hilariously terrible, and soon the room was filled with laughter, a sound that felt like a balm for all their hearts. That evening, after Liam had fallen asleep, Jonathan and Emma sat in the small lounge outside his room. The hospital was quiet, the hum of activity muted as the day wound down. You're good with him, Jonathan said suddenly, breaking the silence. Emma glanced at him, surprised. Thank you, but Liam makes it easy. He's a wonderful kid. He is, Jonathan agreed, his voice tinged with pride. I wish I could do more for him. You're doing more than you realize, Emma said, her tone gentle. Being there for him, loving him, that's what matters most. Jonathan looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting slightly. I wasn't always like this. Before Catherine, I was different. I was present, happy. After she died, I couldn't. Emma reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Grief changes people, Jonathan. It's okay to admit that you've struggled, but it's also okay to let yourself heal. He looked up at her, his blue eyes searching hers. And how do you do that? How do you heal from something like this? Emma hesitated, her own pain flickering across her face. You take it one day at a time, and you let the people who care about you help. Jonathan's gaze softened. You've been through something, haven't you? She nodded slowly. I lost my brother. He was my best friend, my anchor. For a long time, I thought I'd never be okay again. But I learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding a way to move forward while keeping them in your heart. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, her words sinking in. Thank you, Emma, for everything. You don't have to thank me, she replied, her voice warm. I'm just glad I could help. As the stars twinkled outside, Jonathan and Emma returned to Liam's room. Standing side by side, they watched over the boy who had brought them together, their shared love for him, forging a bond that neither had anticipated. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt a flicker of hope, not just for Liam, but for himself as well. And as Emma glanced at him with a quiet smile, he realized that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to heal together. The morning air was crisp as Emma, Jonathan, and Liam finally returned home from the hospital. The mansion seemed warmer somehow, less like a monument of grief and more like a sanctuary. Liam clutched Emma's hand as they walked through the front door, his small bag slung over Jonathan's shoulder. Home sweet home, Emma said cheerfully, giving Liam a wink. Liam smiled but hesitated, looking up at his father. Can we? Can we go to Mom's room today? Jonathan froze, the weight of the question palpable. Emma glanced at him, her expression supportive but expectant. After a long pause, Jonathan nodded. Of course, buddy. Let's go together. Catherine's room had been untouched since the night she passed, a time capsule of her presence. As Jonathan pushed open the door, the scent of her favorite lavender perfume seemed to linger, faint but unmistakable. Liam stepped inside cautiously, his eyes wide as he looked around. It's like she's still here, he whispered. Emma placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. That's because she is, in a way. Everything here tells a story about her. Jonathan moved to the bedside table and picked up a photo of Catherine holding a baby Liam. He knelt down, showing it to his son. She loved this picture. She used to say you were the best thing that ever happened to her. Liam took the photo carefully, at his small fingers tracing the edges. She looks so happy. She was, Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. And she would be so proud of you, Liam. You're just like her in so many ways, brave, kind, and full of life. Liam's eyes filled with tears, but he smiled. Do you think she'd like my dinosaurs? Jonathan chuckled softly. She would love them. She'd probably read you every book about dinosaurs she could find. Emma chimed in, her tone light. And I bet she'd try to make you dinosaur-shaped pancakes. Liam laughed, the sound breaking the heavy air in the room. I'd like that. Jonathan stood and looked around the room. Maybe it's time we made some changes, not to forget her, but to honor her in a way that helps us move forward. Liam nodded eagerly. Can we keep some of her things, like the photo and her books? Of course, Jonathan said, smiling. We'll find a special place for them. Over the next few days, the three of them worked together to transform Catherine's room into a shared family space. They packed away some of her belongings, carefully deciding which items to keep and which to donate. Liam took charge of creating a memory corner, arranging photos, her favorite books, and a small vase of lavender flowers. This way, she'll always be with us, he explained proudly. Jonathan watched his son with a mix of pride and sorrow. You're amazing, Liam. You know that? Liam grinned. I learned from the best. One evening, after Liam had gone to bed, Jonathan and Emma sat in the newly reimagined room, the faint scent of lavender still in the air. A warm fire crackled in the corner, casting a soft glow over the space. I wasn't sure I could do this, Jonathan admitted, his gaze fixed on the flames. But you were right. This, it feels good. Emma smiled gently. Grief is heavy, but sharing it makes it lighter. And seeing Liam so happy, it's worth every step. Jonathan turned to her, his expression serious. You've done more for us than I could ever repay. Liam adores you, and so do I. Emma's breath caught, her cheeks flushing. Jonathan, He reached out, taking her hand. I know this isn't easy for either of us, but I don't want to keep pretending that what I feel doesn't matter. You've brought light back into this house, into my life, and I don't want to lose that. Emma looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability behind his words. I care about you too, Jonathan, but we need to think about Liam. He's been through so much, and I don't want to do anything that might hurt him. Jonathan nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. Liam deserves to see what love looks like. Real love. We can show him that together, one step at a time. Emma smiled, her heart swelling with hope. One step at a time. As the fire crackled softly, they sat together, their hands intertwined, ready to face whatever the future held. Together. The morning sun bathed the Carter mansion in a golden glow. It was a day of celebration, a day to honor not only Liam's recovery, but also the beginning of a new chapter for the family. Jonathan had planned the event meticulously, ensuring every detail would make Liam feel special. Emma stood in the kitchen, helping Clara arrange a colorful assortment of cupcakes. These look amazing, Clara, she said, placing a tiny dinosaur topper on one of the treats. Clara smiled. Well, Liam requested dinosaurs, so dinosaurs it is. He's got everyone running around like it's Jurassic Park, Emma laughed. He deserves it. Just then, Liam burst into the kitchen, his excitement palpable. Miss Emma, Dad says the bounce house is ready. Can we go see it? Emma crouched to his level, her eyes twinkling. Bounce house? I don't know, Liam. I might be too old to bounce. Liam giggled, tugging on her hand. You're not old. Come on. Jonathan appeared in the doorway, his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. He's not going to let you off the hook, you know. Emma straightened, mock sighing. Fine, but if I get stuck in there, it's on you, Mr. Carter. Outside, the garden had been transformed into a vibrant wonderland. Streamers hung from the trees, a table overflowed with treats, and the centerpiece, a massive bounce house, stood proudly on the lawn. Liam darted inside, his laughter echoing as he bounced with unrestrained joy. Emma followed hesitantly, her playful shrieks joining his as Jonathan watched from a distance, a rare smile on his face. Clara approached him, handing him a glass of lemonade. It's good to see him like this, isn't it? Jonathan nodded, his gaze never leaving Liam. I haven't heard him laugh like that in years. Clara tilted her head. That's because he finally has something to laugh about, and you have someone to thank for that. Jonathan glanced at Emma, who was helping Liam do a somersault in the bounce house. I know. As the afternoon wore on, guests began to arrive. Friends, neighbors, and even a few of Jonathan's business associates, though they quickly found themselves swept up in the informal, joyful atmosphere. Emma carried a tray of lemonade to a group of parents, chatting with ease as she kept an eye on Liam. She turned to find Jonathan approaching, a thoughtful expression on his face. Miss Brooks, he said, his tone teasing, you seem to be the life of the party. Emma smiled. Just doing my part to keep the peace. Jonathan hesitated, then gestured toward a quieter corner of the garden. Can I talk to you for a moment? They walked to a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, the sounds of laughter and music fading into the background. Jonathan sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. About Liam, about Catherine, about us. Emma's heart raced, but she kept her expression calm. And? I've spent so much time trying to control everything, thinking it was the only way to protect Liam, he admitted. But you've shown me that life isn't about control. It's about connection, about love. Emma's breath caught as he turned to face her, his blue eyes filled with a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. I don't want to waste any more time hiding from what I feel, Jonathan continued. Emma, you've become more than just a part of Liam's life. You've become a part of mine, and I don't want to imagine a future without you in it. Emma's eyes filled with tears, her voice soft. Jonathan, I care about you too, but this isn't just about us. It's about Liam. He's been through so much already. We have to make sure this is the right choice for him. Jonathan reached for her hand, his grip steady and reassuring. Liam loves you, Emma, and he deserves to see what a real family looks like, one built on trust, respect, and love. We can give him that, together. Emma smiled, her heart swelling with hope. Then, let's do it. One step at a time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the party began to wind down. Guests lingered, reluctant to leave the warmth of the celebration. Jonathan gathered everyone near the bounce house, where Liam stood beaming, his cheeks flushed from excitement. I just want to thank all of you for being here, Jonathan said, his voice steady. Today isn't just about celebrating Liam's recovery, it's about celebrating family, love, and the people who make life worth living. He glanced at Emma, his smile softening. And it's about new beginnings. Liam raised his hand eagerly. And dinosaurs! Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Jonathan chuckled. Yes, and dinosaurs! That night, after everyone had gone home, Jonathan, Emma, and Liam sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the garden. Today was the best day ever, Liam said, his voice sleepy but content. Jonathan wrapped an arm around his son. I'm glad you think so, buddy. Emma leaned back, her gaze on the stars. It was a good day. Jonathan turned to her, his expression serious but full of warmth. It was, and it's just the beginning. As the night wrapped them in its gentle embrace, the three of them sat together, their hearts full of love, ready to face whatever came next, together. The sky was a canvas of grays, the clouds heavy with the promise of rain. Jonathan stood at the large bay window, watching the shifting skies. Emma was in the kitchen with Liam, laughing softly as they decorated cookies. The sound of their laughter drifted into the room, filling the once silent mansion with a warmth that Jonathan had almost forgotten was possible. Clara entered the room, carrying a tray of tea. Storm's coming, she said, setting the tray on the coffee table. Jonathan nodded, his gaze still on the horizon. It doesn't feel like a bad one, more like something new is about to begin. Clara tilted her head, studying him. You've changed, Jonathan, for the better. Jonathan smiled faintly. I owe that to them. Emma and Liam, they've given me a second chance. The rain started as a gentle drizzle, soft drops pattering against the windows. By the time dinner was finished, it had turned into a full storm, the kind that made the world outside feel distant and enclosed. Liam peeked out the door, his eyes wide with excitement. Can we go out in it? Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Out in the rain? You just got out of the hospital. Liam pouted. But it's not cold, and I promise I'll wear my boots. Emma grinned, kneeling beside him. How about we make a deal? 10 minutes in the rain, and then it's straight to a warm bath. Liam nodded eagerly, already reaching for his raincoat. Jonathan shook his head, smiling despite himself. You're going to get soaked. Emma grabbed her own coat, looking back at him with a playful glint in her eyes. Then you'd better come with us to make sure we don't float away. The garden was transformed into a magical, rain-soaked wonderland. Puddles shimmered under the faint glow of the outdoor lights, and the fresh scent of rain filled the air. Liam jumped from puddle to puddle, his laughter echoing through the night. Emma turned her face to the sky, letting the rain wash over her. She twirled once, her arms outstretched, looking carefree and radiant. Jonathan watched her, captivated by the way she seemed to belong in the moment, as though the rain had been waiting just for her. Come on, Mr. Carter, Emma called, her voice teasing. Jonathan hesitated, but when Liam grabbed his hand and pulled him toward a particularly large puddle, he gave in. The splash was uncharacteristically childlike for him, and the sound of Liam's giggles made it worth every drop of water soaking through his shoes. You're not half bad at this, Emma teased, stepping closer. Jonathan smirked. Careful, Miss Brooks, or I might make a habit of it. She laughed, shaking her head as rain dripped from her hair. I'd like to see that. At some point, Liam grew tired, and Emma scooped him up, holding him close as they made their way back inside. His head rested on her shoulder, his breaths deep, and even as he drifted to sleep, Jonathan watched them, a lump forming in his throat. It was a simple scene, Emma carrying Liam up the stairs, the sound of rain still falling outside, but it felt monumental. Later, after Liam was tucked into bed, Jonathan found Emma sitting on the porch. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, and she was wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. "You'll catch a cold out here," he said, stepping outside. Emma smiled without looking at him. "I'll take my chances. It's beautiful, isn't it? The way the rain cleans everything, makes it all feel new." Jonathan sat beside her, the warmth of her presence easing the chill in the air. "You have a way of seeing the world that I envy." Emma turned to him, her expression soft. "You can see it too, Jonathan. You just have to let yourself." They sat in silence for a moment, the rain a gentle backdrop to their thoughts. Finally, Jonathan reached for her hand, his touch tentative but firm. "Emma, you've brought something into my life that I didn't think I'd ever find again. You've made this house a home. You've given Liam and me hope, and I don't want to let that go." Emma's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not just saying this because of Liam, are you?" Jonathan shook his head. "No, this is about you and me, Emma, and about the family we've become." She squeezed his hand, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I care about you, Jonathan, more than I ever thought I would. But this isn't just about us. Liam's been through so much. We have to make sure we do this right." Jonathan smiled, his thumb brushing against her hand. "Then we take it one day at a time, together." Emma leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the rain. In that moment, everything felt possible. The storm passed, leaving the air fresh and the world renewed. And as Jonathan and Emma sat together, their hearts full of quiet hope, they knew they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the rain from the night before leaving the world refreshed and vibrant. The mansion was alive with activity, filled with the hum of last-minute preparations. Liam, dressed in a tiny navy suit, darted between rooms, his excitement bubbling over. "Miss Emma," he called, skidding to a stop in the living room. "Do you need help with anything? I can carry stuff." Emma knelt down, adjusting his crooked tie with a smile. "I think we've got it covered, but I do need one very important thing from you." "What is it?" Liam asked, his eyes wide. Emma leaned closer, whispering conspiratorially. "You need to be the best ring bearer anyone's ever seen. Can you handle that?" Liam straightened, puffing out his chest. "I've got this." Jonathan entered the room, his eyes softening as he took in the scene. "You look sharp, buddy. And you, Miss Brooks, stunning." Emma turned, her cheeks flushing. She was wearing a simple yet elegant dress, the pale blue fabric complementing her glowing complexion. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. You don't look too bad yourself." Jonathan smirked, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit. "Ready for today?" Emma's gaze softened, her smile warm. "I've never been more ready." The ceremony was held in the garden, the lush greenery and colorful flowers creating a picturesque setting. Guests filled the chairs, their murmurs of anticipation blending with the soft melody of a string quartet. Liam stood at the front, clutching the small satin pillow that held the rings. He scanned the crowd, grinning when he spotted Emma walking down the aisle. Jonathan's breath hitched as he watched her approach. She wasn't just beautiful, she was radiant, her every step filled with grace and confidence. When she reached him, he took her hand, his voice low. "You take my breath away." Emma laughed softly, her eyes shining. "You're not so bad yourself." The officiant began, his voice steady and warm. "Today, we gather not just to celebrate the union of two people, but the creation of a family." Jonathan and Emma exchanged vows, their words heartfelt and intimate. "I never thought I'd find love again," Jonathan said, his voice steady despite the emotion brimming in his eyes. "But you've shown me what it means to open my heart, to trust, and to believe in the future. Emma, you're the light in my life, and I promise to stand by you through every joy and every challenge." Emma's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Jonathan, you've taught me the meaning of resilience and love. You've given me a place where I belong, where we all belong. I promise to cherish you, to stand by your side, and to love you and Liam with all my heart. Liam, unable to contain himself, chimed in. And I promise to be the best kid ever. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Jonathan ruffled Liam's hair, his expression full of affection. Then I guess it's official, Jonathan said, his voice warm. The rings were exchanged, the words spoken, and when Jonathan kissed Emma, the applause was deafening. The reception was held under a canopy of twinkling lights, the atmosphere alive with laughter and music. Liam darted from table to table, showing off his ring-bearer pillow and accepting congratulations as though he'd orchestrated the entire event himself. Emma and Jonathan moved through the crowd, sharing quiet words with their guests. At one point, Emma spotted Liam standing near a rainbow-colored balloon arch, his face thoughtful. She approached him, kneeling down. "What's on your mind, little man?" Liam pointed to the sky, where the last rays of the setting sun created a faint rainbow. "Do you think Mom is watching us?" Emma's throat tightened, but she nodded. "I think she is, and I think she's very proud of you." Jonathan joined them, placing a hand on Liam's shoulder. "She'd be proud of all of us." Liam smiled, his expression peaceful. "I think she sent the rainbow to tell us she's happy." Emma glanced at Jonathan, who gave her a small nod. Together, they pulled Liam into a hug, the three of them standing under the rainbow's gentle arc. As the night deepened, Jonathan and Emma shared their first dance under the stars. The music was soft, the moment intimate. "You know," Jonathan said, his voice low, "I used to think I'd never feel whole again. But here, with you and Liam, I finally do." Emma rested her head on his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "We're a family now, and families heal together." Jonathan kissed her temple, his arms tightening around her. "I love you, Emma, more than I ever thought possible." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "I love you too, Jonathan." Around them, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of their hearts beating in unison. Beneath the same sky, they had found their way back to love, to hope, and to each other.